It is a truth universally acknowledged, at least by the more precise members of the Horological Society of Great Britain, that a clock which is consistently 5 minutes fast is far more irritating than one that does not work at all.
The latter may be safely disregarded, while the former lulls one into a false sense of punctuality, often fatal to luncheon arrangements, train connections, and on rare occasions human life. Lord Peter Death Breddon Wimsey, second son of the 15th Duke of Denver, was thinking precisely this as he leaned back on a lumpy sofa of indeterminate colour and watched a pair of rather fine carriage clocks argue silently with each other across the mantel-shelf of the late Mr. Ambrose Tarrant's study. One declared the time to be 7 minutes past 4, while the other, more solid in construction, though less ambitious in decoration, insisted upon 2 minutes to the hour. "It's one thing," Lord Peter observed to the constable beside him, "to be fashionably late. But when one is murdered early, it shows either an appalling lack of social tact, or rather too much anticipation, wouldn't you say?" The constable, a florid man with the sort of moustache that gave one the impression of being barked at even when he whispered, shifted uncomfortably. "Begging your lordship's pardon, I wouldn't say anything just now. The inspector's not yet arrived." "Then may I humbly submit," said Wimsey, with a lightness that carried just a whisker of bite, "that murder has no respect for protocol. He strikes whenever it pleases him, rather like Beethoven or Aunt Agatha." He stood and paced the small study with feline grace, pausing by the heavy mahogany desk where Ambrose Tarrant, solicitor and sometime churchwarden, now lay slumped over a rather dull volume of the Ecclesiastical Law Review. Death, not content to be punctual, had added theatrical flair. Mr. Tarrant had expired neatly over his own marginalia in ink the same shade as the blood that trickled from the corner of his mouth. There were no signs of violence, none, at least, that advertised themselves. The only window was latched, the door had been unlocked, and the gas fire glowed with gentle civility. A full cup of tea, milk, 1 sugar, sat unmolested by the blotting pad, the steam long since surrendered to the chill of a North Hampshire afternoon. "Who found him?" Wimsey asked, though he already knew. He had a habit of requesting information he had no need of merely to gauge the quality of response. The constable did not disappoint. "His wife, sir. Mrs. Tarrant said he never came through for his biscuits. She brought the tea in herself, maids on her half-day, and found him thus, arms neatly folded, expression a trifle ecclesiastical." "She screamed, sir." "Ah, useful. One hopes loudly enough for the neighbours to verify." "She's just next door, sir, in the parlour. Inspector Harkness left word for no one to be disturbed till he arrives." "Then I shall disturb them all in his honour," Wimsey replied brightly. "Let us pay our respects to the widow Tarrant and see whether she offers us strong tea or stronger misdirection." The constable hesitated. "Very well, my lord, though if I may, I'd not go poking about just yet. Inspector won't thank—" "You? Oh, my dear constable," said Wimsey, breezing past him with an air of genteel menace. "The inspector may scowl all he likes, but he'll thank me in the end. They usually do, or if not, they very nearly mean to." He stepped into the narrow corridor, brushing past the ancestral portraits of grim-bearded Tarrants who had, judging by their faces, all died of severe character. The parlour door opened at his touch. Mrs. Tarrant was already seated by the fire, with that precise posture of the newly bereaved middle-class widow, composed, dry-eyed and faintly annoyed at the interruption to her housekeeping. Her eyes, a flat hazel, met Wimsey's with the look of one assessing the quality of a visiting clergyman before deciding whether to offer cake or not. "My condolences," said Lord Peter with his most courtly bow. "May I intrude a moment on your grief?" "You already have," she replied. Then, perhaps catching the faint quirk of his brow, added, "Forgive me. I'm not quite myself." "Quite understandable," Whimsy said, taking the chair opposite. "One rarely is when one's husband has inconveniently shuffled off his mortal retainer's coil." "Might I ask, was Mr. Tarrant in good health this morning?" She blinked. "Yes, no, I mean, he had indigestion, he always does after Sunday beef." And yet he persisted. "It's what we had." "Indeed. Routine can be terribly reliable. One notices so sharply when it's broken. May I ask, did he seem otherwise out of spirits? Distracted? Affectionate?" Her eyes narrowed. "Why would you ask if he was affectionate?" "Oh, forgive me," said Whimsy smoothly. "You know how we bachelors romanticize marriage. My man Bunter assures me the reality is far less charming. But the point is this. Your husband appears to have died without a struggle, but with, shall we say, considerable discretion. No mess, no noise. Rather like a solicitor entering the next life as if it were a client's drawing room, quietly, without fuss, and with the paperwork in order." She said nothing. "Only," he went on, "I wonder what might induce such a man to die with his clock 5 minutes fast. Or," and here he smiled, "was it 5 minutes slow?" Her brow creased. "What? Oh, never mind. A quibble of time. But I do rather think, Mrs. Tarrant, that someone here has been just a trifle too punctual." She looked up, startled. But Whimsy had already risen. "Now," he murmured, half to himself, "if I were a corpse, where would I have hidden the truth?" And with that, Lord Peter Whimsy stepped lightly from the parlour, humming the Dies Irae under his breath. Lord Peter Whimsy had always maintained that murder, for all its theatrical attractions, was at heart a domestic matter. It might masquerade in melodrama, bloodied letter-openers and sinister staircases, but in the end, it was about who made the tea, who set the clocks, and who left which door unlatched at precisely the wrong time. It was an intimacy betrayed, not a passion inflamed. And in the quiet red-brick halls of the Tarrant home, that betrayal hung in the air like the lingering scent of pipe smoke and burnt toast. He moved back into the study, pausing briefly to inspect the desk again. The body had now been respectfully covered with a woolen shawl, possibly chosen for its drabness. One did not want death to be ostentatious. Whimsy's eyes roamed over the scattered papers. Tarrant's pen had left an ink blot mid-sentence, a slow curl of blue uncoiling like a question mark. The sentence itself, "Client refuses to acknowledge the amended clause," trailed into nothing. Whimsy tapped the pen against his thumbnail thoughtfully. "Where does an honest solicitor make enemies?" he murmured. "In trust disputes, contested wills, or when he forgets his wife's birthday, I suppose. Though I suspect Mrs. Tarrant would consider such forgetfulness merely an administrative oversight." The constable, lingering near the door, in the manner of men who fear being left alone with either corpses or aristocrats, coughed. "There's the maid back now, sir. Name of Elsie. Bit flustered, but says she's seen nothing." "Splendid," said Whimsy. "One rarely sees anything useful when one's young, flustered, and accustomed to scrubbing linoleum. Let us meet her." He found the girl in the narrow kitchen, still in her coat, clutching a damp umbrella like a moral failing. She curtsied awkwardly when she saw him, her eyes darting to the constable behind him as if for protection. "Good evening, Miss Elsie," said Whimsy kindly. "Or is it still afternoon? The clocks here appear to have differing opinions." She looked confused. "It's nearly 5, sir, I think." "You think? How democratic. Never mind. Your mistress has had a most unpleasant shock, and I imagine you will soon be washing rather more linen than usual. Tell me, when did you last see Mr. Tarrant?" "Just before I went out, sir. 2:30. I asked if he'd want his usual tea at 4. He said yes. Mrs. Tarrant said she'd take it in herself, since I was going to see my cousin." "And what mood was he in?" She shrugged helplessly. "Same as always, quiet. He don't like fuss. No one ever does, until they're in need of an alibi." Whimsy smiled to take the sting from it. "Now, I don't suppose you noticed anything odd in the house before you left? A door ajar, strange smells, ticking where ticking oughtn't to be. She frowned. No, sir. Everything was tidy, but she hesitated. The clock in the hallway, that big one with the lion feet, it was chiming when I went out. But I remember thinking it was too early. I looked at my watch and it said 25 past. But the clock struck 1/2 past. Whimsy's expression sharpened imperceptibly. Are you quite sure? Oh, yes, sir. I keep my watch proper. Mum got it for me when I went into service. I thought maybe the hallway clock was fast. Indeed. And clocks that are fast can be ever so revealing. Thank you, Elsie. That's most enlightening. He left her with a slight bow and a quiet instruction to the constable to ensure she remained nearby. Then, moving back into the hallway, he examined the grandfather clock with its brass lion feet and chipped enamel dial. It now read exactly 5 minutes past 5. He checked his own pocket watch, which declared the time to be 5 minutes to the hour. Ah, he said softly. 5 minutes fast, just like the carriage clock on the study mantel. One might almost think it a family habit. He was still contemplating this when Inspector Harkness arrived in a gust of overcoat and official indignation. Whimsy, the inspector said without preamble. I suppose you've already interrogated half the household and drawn your own dazzling conclusions? Only the maid and the widow, Whimsy said affably. And I have drawn no conclusions. I've merely begun counting the clocks. A most ticklish pastime. Harkness frowned. Clocks? Is this about the time of death? Oh, not at all. That'll be a matter for the coroner and the consistency of the man's liver. But the question is, if a man dies in his study at 4 o'clock, and the clocks all say 5 past, has he died before his time or after it? Harkness gave him a look reserved for children and mental patients. Whimsy, we've a dead solicitor, poisons likely. Wife was home, no sign of forced entry. That's the shape of it. Yes, said Whimsy, and what an admirably symmetrical shape, like a paperweight. But paperweights rarely kill anyone, so I suggest we look beneath. The inspector sighed. Did you find anything of interest? Oh, several things. A half-read brief, a teacup gone cold, and a wife who didn't cry. Also, the clocks are unreliable, the maid is precise, and the deceased had indigestion. You suspect the wife? I suspect something, said Whimsy. I'm just not yet certain what it's pretending to be. It was at that moment that Bunter appeared in the doorway, coatless and efficient, with a discreet clearing of the throat. My lord, I've taken the liberty of examining the kitchen bin. The milk jug still contains sufficient for a cup. No traces of bicarbonate of soda in the drawer. However, I did locate a packet of powdered arsenic tucked behind the flour tin. Did you, by Jove? Said Whimsy, eyes lighting up. And does it appear recently handled? It does, my lord. The paper is creased, and the fold still tight. There's a faint odour as well. Inspector Harkness stepped forward. That's enough for a warrant. We'll take the wife in now. But Whimsy raised a languid hand. Steady on. Let us not leap upon the obvious. Mrs. Tarrant might be guilty, yes, but let us recall that this house contains too many clocks. Not too few. When every clock is fast, one must ask, what, precisely, is being hurried along? He turned to Bunter. Any fingerprints on the tin? Gloved handling, I believe, my lord. Of course. And Mrs. Tarrant seems a bare-handed sort of woman, doesn't she? No fuss, as the maid said. Harkness made an irritated sound. What are you getting at, Whimsy? I don't know yet, said Whimsy cheerfully, but I should very much like to know who last had reason to correct the hallway clock, or why the study's clock and the hall's are both identically fast. And more importantly, whether Ambrose Tarrant died because he was poisoned, or because someone thought he wouldn't be. He turned, coat swinging lightly, and walked back toward the study. Come, Harkness. I think it's time we paid another visit to the tea tray. He paused. After all, If the tea was meant to be poisoned, the question is, who was it meant for? And behind him in the dim hallway, the lion-footed clock ticked solemnly on. 5 minutes ahead of a death no one had yet quite understood. The buy. Tea tray was a small silver affair, not much larger than a salva, and polished to a near-mirror sheen, betraying neither fingerprints nor fingerprints' absence. It stood on a side table in the parlour, where Mrs. Tarrant sat, now noticeably paler and slightly less composed than when Whimsy had first spoken to her. The teapot, the matching cup and saucer, the sugar bowl, and the milk jug were arranged, with the meticulousness of a woman who had learned to find comfort in ritual, or who wished to project an air of serene control, perhaps both. Whimsy regarded the scene with the light amusement of a man watching the opening moves of a particularly delicate chess game. The inspector was less amused. His eyes flicked between the widow and the tray, a suspicion hardening in his expression. "Mrs. Tarrant," Whimsy began softly, "you mentioned earlier that you had taken the tea into your husband's study yourself." "Yes, Mr. Whimsy, I did. Elsie was out visiting her cousin, and I thought it only right to look after Ambrose myself. And you did so at approximately 4 o'clock. "That's right. And you did not find him then?" "No. He was in the study as usual, reading. I left the tea on the desk and returned to the parlour to finish some letters." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Whimsy's mouth. "Did you not hear the gaslight clicking on behind you? Or perhaps the study door closing?" Mrs. Tarrant hesitated. I cannot say. I was busy." "Ah, the famous busy widow's excuse," muttered Harkness under his breath. Whimsy ignored him. "You see, the door to the study is a heavy thing, and it does not shut quietly. No, I suppose it does not. And the gaslight, well, it's an old-fashioned pilot. It flickers audibly when ignited. Were you sure you heard none of this?" "I was not paying attention, I'm afraid." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Tarrant, might I inquire whether you expected to find your husband alive when you took the tea?" She blinked rapidly. "Of course. And yet, by your own admission, you left the tea untouched on the desk, did you not?" "Yes." "May I ask why?" "Because he was reading, and I did not wish to disturb him." "Quite so. A considerate wife. Now, were you aware that the tea was still warm when the maid returned at 4:30? Mrs. Tarrant stiffened. "I did not know. And the maid told us she found it so, and that she thought the clock in the hall was fast. The hallway clock chimed the half hour as she left, but her watch read 25 past. The widow's hands tightened around the cup. "I cannot explain that. Perhaps no one can." Whimsy's voice softened to a conspiratorial murmur. "Except for those who have altered the clocks to mislead. If the hallway clock was fast by 5 minutes, as we have established, then the tea was taken in at 25 past 4 by standard time, but the clock chimed 4:30, which would mean, if we trust the hallway clock, that your husband died just after 4:30, yet his own clock in the study, also 5 minutes fast, suggested a different time." Harkness grunted, rubbing his chin. "That's all very well, Whimsy, but what good is clock chasing to a man who's already dead?" "Ah, but it is the rhythm of time itself, Inspector, that reveals the murderer's slip. Consider, if the victim's study clock and the hallway clock are both 5 minutes fast, who benefits from this alignment? Who controls the clocks in the house?" Mrs. Tarrant faltered. I do not control them myself. Elsie sets the hallway clock, and Ambrose always insisted on adjusting the study clock himself." "And who was the last to wind the clocks?" "I believe Elsie did the hallway one this morning. Ambrose wound the study clock before breakfast. Then Elsie's watch must be our benchmark." "Yes, which brings us back to the tea." Whimsy tapped a finger lightly on the silver tray. "It was made and served still warm at 25 past 4, according to your maid's watch. Your husband was found slumped in his chair, apparently dead by the time you found him shortly thereafter. Now, was the tea intended for your husband? Or for someone else? Mrs. Tarrant's gaze flickered away. I don't understand. It's quite simple. Poison, one assumes, was administered through the tea. If so, did the victim drink it? Or was it meant for someone else? Perhaps you? The widow stiffened. Why would I want to harm my husband? Forgive me, I am merely playing with possibilities. Whimsy's tone was gentle, but his eyes held a sharper light. Might there be someone else with access to this tea? Someone who would benefit from Mr. Tarrant's demise? Mrs. Tarrant shook her head. No, no one. Whimsy was not convinced. No one ever benefits, Mrs. Tarrant. At least not until one peels back the polite layers. I propose we look further into the household and its inhabitants. He rose, offering a hand to the widow, who did not take it. Instead, she rose stiffly and excused herself to the adjacent room, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floorboards. Inspector Harkness seized the opportunity. Well, Whimsy, what now? We've got a poisoned tea, a house full of clocks that don't agree, and a very nervous widow. Precisely the ingredients of a fine mystery, Inspector. Whimsy smiled. Let us begin with the servants. There is always the smallest domestic detail overlooked by those not trained to observe. They returned to the kitchen, where Elsie was now seated, fidgeting nervously with the hem of her apron. Elsie, Whimsy began gently, you mentioned earlier you were visiting your cousin. What time did you leave the house exactly? Just after 2:30, sir. And you returned just before 5. Did you notice anyone coming or going while you were out? No, sir. The house was quiet. Quietness can be a good thing or a warning sign. Whimsy's eyes twinkled. Did you hear any unusual noises? Voices? Doors opening? No, sir. Only the clocks chiming. Ah, the clocks again. Whimsy smiled indulgently. One cannot escape them. Tell me, Elsie, do you have a key to the study? She nodded. Yes, sir, for when the master needed his papers. And did you enter the study at any time today? No, sir. Are you certain? Not to fetch anything or to adjust the clock? She shook her head quickly. No, sir, I did not. Very good. Whimsy turned to Harkness. That puts Elsie out of the study between 2:30 and 5. Now let us consider the timeline. Mrs. Tarrant took the tea at 4, left it on the desk. The maid left at 25 past 4. The victim died sometime shortly after. The gas had been lit, indicating someone was in the study after Mrs. Tarrant left. He paused, then added, and someone who did not want the clocks to betray them. Harkness looked at him sharply. You think the murderer adjusted the clocks? Not merely that. I think the clocks were adjusted to create an illusion of time that supports an alibi or obscures a crucial window, a window during which the fatal act was committed. Which means, said the inspector, someone had to enter the study after Mrs. Tarrant left and before the maid returned. Exactly so. Any suspects? Whimsy smiled faintly. Let us see who has the key to that locked door. They made their way back to the main hall, where the butler, Mr. Charles Granger, was standing stiffly at attention. A man of a certain age, with the severe features and immaculately trimmed moustache one associates with butlers who have survived 3 wars and 2 dowagers. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he regarded Whimsy with a mixture of respect and thinly veiled impatience. Mr. Granger, Whimsy said, who besides yourself has access to Mr. Tarrant's study? Only the master, the mistress, Miss Elsie, and myself, my lord, the butler replied crisply. And you? I was in the wine cellar during the afternoon, my lord, cataloguing the vintage stock. You may verify with the housekeeper. Indeed, I shall. Whimsy turned to the inspector. The alibi of the butler is verified by the housekeeper's statement. Elsie's alibi stands. Mrs. Tarrant is in question. Harkness sighed. That leaves only the widow and the clocks. What now? Now, said Whimsy softly. We consider the clocks once more. There is an inconsistency here that one might call a fatal flaw. He led the party back into the study. The two clocks on the mantelpiece ticked in uneasy harmony, 5 minutes fast. The grandfather clock outside struck the half-hour, its deep tone resonating through the hall. Who adjusted these clocks? Whimsy asked. Silence. The maid did the hall clock this morning, and the master wound the study clock before breakfast, yes? Correct, my lord. And who wound or adjusted the study clock after that? No one spoke. Whimsy's eyes gleamed. Exactly. The silence grew heavy. Harkness shifted impatiently. Do you have a theory, Whimsy? I do. And it begins with a seemingly trivial detail, the clock in the hallway. It chimes past when the maid's watch says 25 past. It is precisely 5 minutes fast. Now, if someone wanted to confuse the time of death, they would ensure that all clocks were fast by exactly the same margin, yes? Yes. Yet here, both study and hall clocks are 5 minutes fast, but the time of death as suggested by the maid's watch is based on real time, 25 past. Harkness nodded slowly. Whimsy continued. If the murderer killed Ambrose Tarrant shortly after 4:30 but left the clocks fast, anyone relying on those clocks would be misled to believe the death occurred at 5 past, or later. This allows the murderer to establish an alibi for the period immediately after 4:30, which is the window of opportunity. And that alibi belongs to Mrs. Tarrant. The widow entered quietly, overhearing the last words. Her face was pale, but composed. Lord Peter, she said quietly, I assure you I have nothing to hide. Whimsy inclined his head. Of course, Mrs. Tarrant, but as we both know, appearances can be as deceptive as clocks that run 5 minutes. Fast. He looked at the widow steadily. Would you mind if I examined your wrists? Her eyes flicked briefly to the window, then back to him, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Slowly, she extended a hand. On her left wrist was a faint circular indentation, an impression as if from a tight bracelet recently removed. A watch? Whimsy asked. No, she said. A bracelet, a gift from Ambrose. Whimsy's gaze lingered. And was this bracelet often worn? Always, until today. He nodded thoughtfully. A detail, Mrs. Tarrant, that might become significant. But for now, let us continue to uncover the truth beneath the clock's ticking. The room seemed to grow colder as the shadows lengthened. Somewhere, a clock struck 5. Whimsy smiled slightly, as though the hours passing brought him closer to something hidden, just out of reach, and somewhere in that quiet house, the murderer waited, certain their secret was safe. Whimsy left the study with a slow, deliberate step, his mind clearly still revolving around the puzzle of the clocks and the delicate bracelet mark upon Mrs. Tarrant's wrist. The room, once a sanctuary of scholarly calm, now felt like a theatre set where unseen players danced behind the curtains of polite society. The inspector followed closely, his brow furrowed as though every tick of the clock were a challenge to his patience. We must speak with Miss Elsie again, Whimsy said, his voice low and thoughtful. She is a piece of this puzzle, whether willingly or unwittingly. The kitchen had a certain austerity to it, a no-nonsense domain where the truth was less likely to be veiled behind layers of social grace. Elsie sat stiffly at the table, her fingers twisting a thread in her apron, eyes cast down. The sight of Whimsy and the inspector seemed to make her shrink, as though their presence drew out some deeper unease. Miss Elsie, Whimsy began, you left the house at precisely 2:30 and returned just before 5. May I ask, how long did your visit to your cousin last? About 2 hours, sir, she replied nervously. Did you travel alone? Yes, sir, on the 6:15 bus. And upon your return, did you come directly here? Yes, sir. Whimsy's eyes twinkled faintly. No detours? Elsie hesitated, then shook her head. Very good. Now, you say the house was quiet during your absence? Yes, sir. No visitors, no unusual sounds. And when you entered the house, did anything strike you as amiss? Elsie's lips pressed into a thin line. No, sir, nothing unusual. Whimsy regarded her for a moment, then asked, Do you know if the study door was locked at any point today? She frowned. Not that I recall, sir. Did you happen to notice if it was locked when you returned? No, sir. Yet, you did not enter the study? No, sir. I never go in there unless asked. Quite right. A respectful servant. Whimsy's voice softened. But it raises a question. If the door was locked, who might have locked it? And when? Elsie looked down. I do not know, then we shall find out. Whimsy and the inspector made their way to the housekeeper's room, where Mrs. Blanchard, a stout woman with sharp eyes, was tidying linens. She regarded the men with mild curiosity, but said little until Whimsy's gentle inquiries began. Mrs. Blanchard, could you tell me who was responsible for locking the study door today? The housekeeper gave a small smile as though the question amused her. Well, Mr. Whimsy, that would be Mr. Granger, the butler. He takes his duties seriously, locking all the private rooms in the afternoon. Did you see him do so today? No, but I heard the click when he passed the corridor. Precisely the sound Mrs. Tarrant might have mistaken for the study door shutting. Quite likely, sir, Whimsy nodded, stroking his chin thoughtfully. And the clocks, Mrs. Blanchard. Who winds them? Who adjusts the time? Miss Elsie. Winds the hallway clock every morning, sir. The study clock is always Mr. Tarrant's concern. And did anyone else have access to these clocks? She hesitated. Not that I know of. Thank you, Mrs. Blanchard. You've been very helpful. As they left, Whimsy paused, turning to Harkness. Notice anything peculiar? The inspector shook his head. Just the usual discretion of a housekeeper. Indeed, but discretion can be the enemy of truth. Back in the hall, Whimsy's gaze flicked to the grandfather clock once more. Its hands marked precisely 5 minutes past 5. A subtle artifice, the synchronization of clocks, Inspector. It creates a veneer of certainty over uncertainty. But what of the gaslight in the study? When was it ignited? According to Mrs. Tarrant, she left it off. It was found lit when the body was discovered. Meaning someone entered the study after she left, and before the maid arrived. Exactly. They returned to the parlour where Mrs. Tarrant was seated, still composed, but with an edge of fatigue showing beneath her genteel exterior. Whimsy approached, careful to maintain a tone of casual conversation rather than accusation. Mrs. Tarrant, may I ask if your husband had any enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm? She shook her head briskly. No, Ambrose was well liked. Were there any tensions, disputes? Business difficulties, perhaps? Her fingers tightened around her teacup. Ambrose had his troubles like any man, but nothing serious. He was a fair man, always. Fair men often find themselves in peril, Whimsy remarked lightly. And you, Mrs. Tarrant? Were there any quarrels between you? No. Never? No. Whimsy allowed a moment's pause before continuing. Your bracelet, your husband's gift. You did not wear it today? No, I took it off this morning. It was uncomfortable. Did anyone see you remove it? No. And where is it now? In my room. Whimsy's eyes glimmered. I should very much like to see it. Mrs. Tarrant hesitated, then nodded. Very well. They followed her upstairs, up a narrow staircase carpeted with a faded runner worn thin at the edges. The bedroom was modest but tastefully furnished, with floral wallpaper peeling slightly at the corners. On the dressing table lay the bracelet, a slender band of gold, intricately worked, but with a fresh scratch on the inside of the clasp. Whimsy picked it up delicately. This scratch, Mrs. Tarrant, appears recent. Yes, I suppose it is. Did you remove it in haste? No, I was in no hurry. Curious. A scratch like this suggests it caught on something. Perhaps the clasp was forced open. She looked away. Mrs. Tarrant, it is the small, reluctant details that speak loudest in a murder investigation. Is there something you wish to tell me? She met his gaze, eyes glistening. No, Lord Peter, I swear I know nothing more. Whimsy replaced the bracelet gently and turned to the inspector. The missing explanation of a forced removal of a personal item, the bracelet, is as telling as the misplaced minutes on a clock. Harkness grunted. I'm beginning to think the murderer isn't nearly as clever as they thought. Or perhaps too clever by half. Descending to the ground floor, Whimsy was struck by a sudden thought. Inspector, do we have a map of the house? Yes, in the office. They made their way to the small office where Harkness retrieved a crumpled floor plan from a drawer. The map showed the layout in neat, precise lines. The study adjoining the parlor, the kitchen at the rear, servants' quarters upstairs, and the main hallway running the length of the house. Note here, Whimsy said, pointing to a narrow corridor between the kitchen and the study. The servants' passage. Does it have a door? Harkness nodded. Yes, it's usually kept closed but unlocked. Has it been checked for fingerprints or signs of recent use? The inspector looked momentarily uncertain. No, sir. Then we must. If someone sought to enter the study unseen, this would be the perfect route. Within minutes, the butler and housekeeper were summoned to conduct a search. The passage was shadowy and narrow, with peeling paint and a faint smell of damp wood. Whimsy examined the door handle closely. No lock, but a latch. And there, the latch shows signs of wear, fresh marks. Someone has been careful, not to make noise, but not careful enough to hide all traces. Would this passage be accessible to Mrs. Tarrant? Only if she wished it so, but more likely a servant or visitor, or the murderer. Whimsy's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Back in the parlor, the late afternoon shadows grew longer, casting oblique angles across the carpet. Mrs. Tarrant sat quietly, her composure now noticeably frayed. Whimsy seated himself opposite, fingers steepled. Mrs. Tarrant, there is a matter that requires clarity. At what time did you last see your husband alive? She met his gaze steadily. At 4 o'clock, when I brought the tea. And at that moment the study door was unlocked. Yes. And the gas was off. Yes. And you left the room after setting down the tea. Yes. And you did not hear the door close behind you? I did not. Whimsy nodded. Yet the gas was found lit, the door locked, and the clocks adjusted. Yes. He paused, then asked softly, Would you care to explain? She shook her head, eyes moist. No, Lord Peter, I cannot. Whimsy rose. Very well. Let us consider the servants once more. He motioned for the inspector, and they stepped outside, leaving Mrs. Tarrant alone with her thoughts. The plot thickened, the small inconsistencies now gathering like the fog outside. Somewhere within this house, hidden behind polite smiles and quiet rooms, lay the truth. A truth that waited to be uncovered beneath the ticking of the clocks and the faint scratch of a gold bracelet clasp. Whimsy and Inspector Harkness reconvened. In the dimming light of the hall, the house settling into that peculiar silence which only a country home can achieve at twilight, quiet yet taut with expectation. Whimsy's gaze lingered on the grandfather clock, still marking 5 minutes past 5, as if daring them to unravel the secret that lay behind those few stolen minutes. We must revisit our assumptions regarding the timeline, Whimsy murmured, almost to himself. The departure of Mrs. Tarrant from the study at precisely 4 o'clock, leaving the door unlocked and gas unlit, forms the backbone of our reconstruction. Yet, by the time the maid returned, the door was locked, and the gaslight. Someone was here in the interim, someone who had both motive and means. Harkness nodded, the inspector's practical mind matching stride for stride with Whimsy's elegant deductions. We have ruled out the servants' movements for that period. Elsie was away, and the others have plausible alibis. Plausible? Yes, but not incontrovertible, Whimsy replied. Let us examine the physical realities of the house. The servants' passage, as we observed, offers a secretive ingress to the study, accessible to those in the know. Yet a locked study door suggests an attempt at concealment. The question is, when was the door locked? Before or after the crime? Mrs. Tarrant asserts it was unlocked when she left, Harkness said. But is her word infallible? And, if the murderer locked the door after committing the deed, they might have used a key or forced the lock. Precisely. A forced lock, though, would leave telltale signs, scratches, splintered wood, or at the very least, the faintest deviation from the lock's normal mechanism. Whimsy's eyes swept the hall. Inspector, did anyone examine the lock itself? The very mechanism? Harkness shook his head. I cannot say. The constables conducted a superficial check, but nothing detailed. Well then, that is our next step. Whimsy's tone took on that peculiar mixture of impatience and enthusiasm characteristic of a man close to a breakthrough. If the lock was manipulated, we will find evidence. Time and soundproofing, too, must be tested. They proceeded to the study once more, the room now dimly lit by the fading light through the heavy curtains. Whimsy knelt before the door, examining the lock with a jeweller's precision. The polished brass gleamed, but his trained eye caught a faint, almost imperceptible scratch on the edge of the keyhole. He ran a gloved finger along the mark, and then drew out a magnifying glass from his pocket, a habit of his when the case required a forensic touch. There, he said softly. A mark made by a narrow instrument, possibly a pick, Harkness frowned. A pick? So our murderer knew his locksmithing. Either that, or was bold enough to try their hand, but the finesse is lacking. A hurried job, judging by the scratch. Whimsy rose, fingers pressed thoughtfully to his lips. And what of the study's soundproofing? Could the noises have been masked? The inspector led him to a panel beside the fireplace. Whimsy tapped lightly. A hollow reverberation answered. False wall or merely an old panel? A trick of the building's age, Harkness explained. The house was renovated in stages. This wing retains some peculiarities. Peculiarities that might mute sound. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. Let us test, he instructed Harkness, to stand in the hallway while he entered the study and slammed the door shut. From the corridor, Harkness reported a muted thud, barely audible. Good, Whimsy said. Now, the question. If someone struck the victim, could the sound have been heard by the rest of the household? Unlikely, the inspector admitted. Then the window. Earlier, Mrs. Tarrant mentioned it was closed, but the maid noted it ajar. A subtle difference, but critical. They moved to the window, heavy with age and stained glass. Whimsy pushed gently. It resisted, but swung open with a creak that would surely have been noticed. An open window, the smell of damp air, Whimsy mused, and the gaslight on. An odd combination. Perhaps a sign of hurried departure or arrival, or a staging. Whimsy's voice dropped. Our killer wishes to suggest a supernatural entry or exit to mislead. Harkness's lips tightened. It is a neat trick, but not a very original one. Originality is not the hallmark of the criminal mind, Inspector, rather repetition of convenient devices. Whimsy's thoughts wandered to the missing salva. Do we know if the silver tray was found? No, Harkness replied. The household has not mentioned it. Then, another omission. I suspect our murderer took it. The butler entered abruptly, carrying a tray of tea. His eyes flicked nervously between the two men. Mr. Granger, Whimsy said gently, has the silver salva been accounted for? The butler cleared his throat. I have not seen it since this morning, sir. Ah-ha. Whimsy's smile was faint but pointed. Might it be that the salva was removed to conceal a clue or a weapon? The butler's face paled. I assure you, sir, I have no knowledge. Very well. Wimsey inclined his head. Your cooperation will be most appreciated. The butler withdrew, leaving behind an air of stiff formality and unspoken tension. Wimsey turned to the inspector. Consider this: the missing salva, the locked door, the ajar window, the adjusted clocks, and the gaslight. These are not random but deliberate, a staged crime scene. Who would go to such lengths? A person intimately familiar with the house, with knowledge of the household's routines, and a motive compelling enough to risk detection. Harkness's brow furrowed. Motives, jealousy, money, revenge. But we have none yet. Patience, Inspector. The threads are gathering. They retired to the parlour, where the servants had gathered, whispering among themselves. Wimsey's eyes swept the room, noting the nervous glances, the sudden silences. Let us speak again with the household staff, he said. Each voice, no matter how meek, may conceal the missing syllable in this whispered confession. He approached Elsie once more, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped a tear from her cheek. Miss Elsie, Wimsey said softly, you spoke of your cousin and your journey today. But what of your employer's habits? Did Mr. Tarrant have any peculiar routines? She looked up, eyes wide. He liked the clocks to be accurate, sir, but he never minded the gas left on if he was working late. Did he ever argue with anyone? No, sir, he was quiet. Quiet men often carry loud secrets, Wimsey murmured. Elsie swallowed. I did overhear Mr. Tarrant speaking with Mr. Granger yesterday. They argued about money. Money? Wimsey raised an eyebrow. And the nature of their dispute? Elsie bit her lip. Mr. Granger wanted more wages. Mr. Tarrant refused. Ah, Wimsey said, a faint smile playing about his lips. The butler's financial dissatisfaction. A motive? Could be, Elsie whispered. Thank you, Miss Elsie. That is most helpful. Wimsey turned to Harkness. We must speak to Mr. Granger again. The butler was found polishing silver in the scullery, his movements precise but stiff. Mr. Granger, Wimsey began, your dispute with Mr. Tarrant over wages, would you say it was heated? Granger's jaw tightened. It was a matter of principle, sir. I expected recognition for my years of service. Recognition can take many forms, not theft, sir. Of course not. But anger is an unpredictable element. Granger's eyes flashed. I had no reason to harm Mr. Tarrant. Yet you had the opportunity. I was in the kitchen, preparing the evening meal. Several witnesses can confirm. Wimsey nodded slowly. Opportunity and motive both necessary, but not sufficient. The lock, the window, the gaslight. These are pieces only a careful mind would arrange. Do you suspect someone else? I suspect many things, but suspicion alone is a poor master. Granger's face remained unreadable, but his fingers trembled slightly. Wimsey rose, tipping his hat. Thank you, Mr. Granger. I may have further questions. As they left, Wimsey's mind raced. The pieces, clocks, lock, window, missing salva, gaslight, fit a pattern of staged confusion. Someone was manipulating not only the physical scene, but the minds of those within the house. His thoughts turned to the missing salva once more. What secret did it conceal? Was it a carrier of poison, a weapon, or merely a decoy? The evening deepened outside, and the house closed in like a tightening noose. Somewhere in this web of half-truths and silent fears lay the solution, waiting for the precision of logic to cut through. Wimsey lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in delicate spirals. We are close, Inspector. The clock may be 5 minutes. Fast, but time will reveal all. As the first hints of night settled fully over the grounds of Dunwich Manor, Wimsey remained restless. The puzzle of the missing salva gnawed at him more insistently than the other, more ostensible clues. There was an almost imperceptible weight to the absence of that silver tray, as if it were less a piece of household finery and more a cipher, waiting to be unlocked. Yet, what message might it bear, and to whom? The servants had returned to their quarters, and the household's murmur faded to a stifled hush. Inspector Harkness, now a willing but somewhat beleaguered companion to Lord Peter's musings, stood by the window, absently turning a key between his fingers, a habit he had developed during long, stalled investigations. "Lord Peter," Harkness ventured, "we've heard the butler's protestations and the maid's nervous glances, but perhaps we should turn our attention to the other household members. The family themselves may be less candid than they admit." Wimsey smiled faintly. "Indeed, Inspector, the game is never played solely among the servants. The very architecture of this mystery demands the presence of a more refined player." They made their way to the drawing room, where the atmosphere retained the faint scent of evening tea and cigar smoke, a residue of Mr. Tarrant's habitual refuge from the rigours of his day. A faint ember still glowed in the brass ashtray, but the room was otherwise empty. Wimsey's eyes roamed over the heavy velvet drapes and the imposing portraits on the walls, ancestors all staring down in faded dignity. It was then that Miss Beatrice Tarrant entered, her composure impeccable, yet her eyes betraying a subtle fatigue. "Lord Peter, Inspector, I trust you have been well. I understand the events of today have been most unsettling." Wimsey inclined his head with his customary civility. "Miss Tarrant, your presence is most welcome. I was just about to inquire after the whereabouts of your nephew, Mr. Richard Tarrant. Have you seen him this evening?" She paused, her fingers tightening imperceptibly on the edge of the table. "Richard left early today, following a rather heated discussion with my late brother. He seemed distressed. I have not seen him since." "A heated discussion, you say?" Wimsey's brow arched. "May I ask the nature of this altercation?" Miss Tarrant hesitated before answering. "It concerned the estate finances. Richard is eager to advance his interests, but my brother was cautious, perhaps too cautious. There was disagreement, nothing more." Harkness interjected. "Would you say the disagreement was public knowledge, Miss Tarrant? Among the household, I mean." "Not exactly public, Inspector. But tensions do have a way of rippling through a household, do they not?" Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed they do. And sometimes such ripples create currents dangerous enough to sweep all else aside." "Did your brother receive any threats or express concerns about his safety?" the inspector asked. "No direct threats, but he was uneasy, more so than usual." Wimsey's gaze lingered a moment on Miss Tarrant. "Unusual unease is a potent signal, Miss Tarrant. Might I trouble you to recount your brother's habits in the days preceding his death? Any visitors, letters, or unexplained absences?" She considered. "There was a man who visited yesterday afternoon, a Mr. Mallory from London, a solicitor or so I was told. Their meeting was brief, and I was not privy to their conversation." "Mr. Mallory, you say?" Wimsey's mind raced. "And did Mr. Mallory leave any documents or correspondence behind?" "Not that I'm aware." "Thank you, Miss Tarrant," Wimsey said. "Your candour is appreciated." As she withdrew, the detective turned to Harkness. "A solicitor's visit is a thread we must follow. Estates and wills often hold the keys to both motive and opportunity." The next morning dawned misty and cold, the grounds cloaked in dew and an uneasy silence. Wimsey requested a search of the study once more, focusing particularly on the papers and bookshelves. The household staff hovered nearby, their faces taut with anxiety. As the searchers rifled through the papers, Wimsey's keen eye caught an oddity, a misplaced ledger beneath a stack of mundane accounts. It was a record of recent transactions, but one page was conspicuously absent. A careful examination revealed the faintest indentations, as though the missing sheet had been removed in haste. That ledger, Whimsy mused aloud, may conceal more than mere numbers. We must recover that missing page. Harkness conferred with the butler, who admitted that a small leather-bound notebook had gone missing from Mr. Tarrant's personal effects recently. I assumed it was misplaced, sir, Granger said, avoiding Whimsy's gaze. The atmosphere thickened. Whimsy's suspicions coalesced around this missing notebook and the absent ledger page, a puzzle within the puzzle. That afternoon, Whimsy requested to see the household clocks. The main hall clock, famously precise, was indeed 5 minutes fast, as everyone had noted. The grandfather clock in the study was also fast, yet the clocks in the servants' quarters and the kitchen ran several minutes slow. A deliberate discrepancy, or mere oversight. An intentional distortion of time, Whimsy declared. If our murderer altered the clocks, it could explain conflicting testimonies and the supposed timeline. It is no accident that the clocks disagree. Harkness frowned. But who would have both the knowledge and the opportunity to tamper with the clocks? Someone intimately familiar with the house's inner workings. Perhaps the butler, or one of the household's more trusted employees. The day's interviews continued, each servant's narrative aligning only to fracture, when cross-referenced with the altered clocks and the shifting timeline. It became increasingly clear that a carefully crafted facade had been erected. Returning. To the drawing room, Whimsy asked for a private word with Miss Elsie once more. Her nerves were fraying, but she spoke with newfound resolve. There was a night visitor, sir, she confessed in a low voice. I heard voices by the garden gate, late last night, whispers between Mr. Tarrant and someone I could not see. Whispers, you say? What did they speak of? I could not make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost fearful. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. Fear is an admission, Miss Elsie, and it often precedes tragedy. Do you think this visitor could be the murderer? Harkness asked. Whimsy smiled thinly. Let us not leap ahead, Inspector. The night's shadows conceal more than guilt. They also protect the innocent. Night fell again, and Whimsy found himself walking the perimeter of the estate, contemplating the garden gate Elsie mentioned. The air was damp and chill, and the faint glow of distant lanterns cast long, shifting shadows. He noted a small scratch on the garden gate's latch, fresh, as if recently forced or manipulated. It was a detail that might have been missed but now took on critical importance. Someone had entered or exited under cover of darkness, a fact that both contradicted and complemented the timeline he was painstakingly reconstructing. Returning. Indoors, Whimsy paused by the mantel and absently lifted a curious object, a small, ornate clockwork mechanism, partially disassembled. It was a gift from his brother, a puzzle to test his patience. This house, Whimsy murmured to himself, is a clockwork contraption itself, delicate, complex, and capable of fatal misalignment. The threads were drawing taut. The missing, salva, the altered clocks, the secret visitor, the locked study, the scratched lock, the mysterious ledger, each a cog in the machinery of deceit. As dawn threatened the horizon, Whimsy felt the unmistakable stirrings of revelation approaching. The murderer's hand trembled, and the intricate dance of shadows was nearing its final movement. Soon, Inspector, he said quietly. Soon, the clock will strike true. The morning light crept cautiously through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns upon the polished oak floorboards of Dunwich Manor. Lord Peter Whimsy sat quietly in the library, a slender volume of Horace open, but largely ignored, on his lap. His eyes were fixed on the window, where the garden gate stood closed, yet somehow still radiated a silent threat. Inspector Harkness entered, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, clutching a sheaf of notes. Lord Peter, I have been reviewing the Timelines again. The statements from the household staff are at odds with each other, but when adjusted for the clock discrepancies, a new picture emerges. Whimsy gave a subtle nod, eyes still distant. Do share, Inspector. Our clockwork puzzle has suddenly taken on a more rhythmic pulse. Harkness laid out a carefully annotated chart. The gardener's account places Mr. Tarrant's arrival at the estate precisely at 3:20 p.m., according to the kitchen clock, which we know is 5 minutes slow. That would mean 3:25 on the hall clock, correct? Indeed, Whimsy confirmed. And the butler's statement, he claims to have seen Mr. Tarrant in the drawing room at 3:30 p.m. on the grandfather clock, which is 5 minutes fast. That adjusts to 3:25 as well. Exactly, Harkness said. But here is the anomaly. Miss Elsie, our maid, insists she heard voices at the garden gate after 4 p.m. on her clock, which runs slow. Adjusted, that would place the voices close to 4:05 p.m. hall time. However, all accounts agree Mr. Tarrant was alone in his study from 3:45 until the murder was discovered shortly after 5 p.m. Whimsy tapped his chin thoughtfully. So we have two conflicting events. A reported late-night visitor at the garden gate and the victim's presence in the study, ostensibly alone. The question is whether one of these accounts is a fabrication, or if the victim was deceiving all parties by presence and absence both. The detective rose and moved toward the mantelpiece, adjusting the small clockwork mechanism he had been examining the previous evening. Time is our adversary and ally in equal measure. The subtle manipulation of these clocks has been deliberate to confuse, misdirect, and delay. Our culprit is certainly versed in the minutiae of the household. Harkness frowned. Which narrows the field considerably. Who among the household has both intimate knowledge and opportunity? Whimsy smiled with his usual ironic arch. The butler, Granger, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Pembroke, are our chief suspects in this regard. Their knowledge of the estate's peculiarities is unparalleled. And yet, Harkness said, their demeanour remains impeccable, almost rehearsed in their denials. Indeed, a rehearsed denial often suggests rehearsed guilt, but not always. One must watch for cracks in the performance, not merely the performance itself. At that moment, the door opened, and Miss Beatrice Tarrant entered, her face pale but resolute. Lord Peter, Inspector, I must speak with you. I have found something in my brother's study, a hidden compartment in the writing desk. It contained correspondence I had never seen before. Whimsy's interest was piqued. A secret cache, Miss Tarrant. The very phrase has the flavour of intrigue. She handed over a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Whimsy leafed through them carefully. The handwriting was elegant, but the tone was furtive, almost conspiratorial. The letters hinted at clandestine meetings and undisclosed debts, signed only with a cryptic monogram. M. Harkness frowned. M? Could this be Mr. Mallory, the solicitor you mentioned? Most likely, Miss Tarrant agreed. But there is more. One letter speaks of a final reckoning and the necessity of silence. It is dated just 2 days before my brother's death. Whimsy's fingers traced the inked words, eyes gleaming with sudden clarity. We now have a motive emerging from the shadows, secrets threatening to surface, and a demand for silence by means most severe. He stood abruptly, the weight of revelation settling on him. Inspector, we must speak once more with Mr. Granger and Mrs. Pembroke. If there is a secret pact or threatened exposure, the custodians of the household may well have been drawn into this deadly web. As they made their way to the servants' quarters, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The servants were gathered, eyes averted or suspiciously alert. Whimsy's manner was cool but penetrating. Mr. Granger, Whimsy began, you are a man of impeccable reputation, yet the role you play is delicate. Tell me, do you know of any visitors to the estate after dark in the past week? Granger's lips twitched in an involuntary grimace. No, my lord. None that I can recall beyond the usual family and staff. And the missing salva, Mr. Granger. Does its absence trouble you? The butler hesitated just a heartbeat before replying, "It does, my lord, but I assure you I have no knowledge of it." Wimsey's eyes narrowed slightly. "A curious thing, considering your oversight of the dining arrangements." Mrs. Pembroke entered, her expression composed but eyes flickering with unease. Wimsey's gaze turned to her. "And you, Mrs. Pembroke, would you care to comment on any unusual occurrences or alterations to the household routine?" She swallowed and said, "Nothing out of the ordinary, Lord Peter. The household runs on order and precision." "Indeed," Wimsey agreed, "but sometimes the most ordered households conceal the most chaotic truths." The inspector stepped forward. "There is a matter of the clocks, both literal and figurative. Someone has tampered with them. Could it be one of you?" Neither answered, but the silence was heavy with implication. Wimsey's gaze shifted thoughtfully. "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Pembroke, do you find the absence of that silver salver as troubling as I do? Not merely for its value, but for its disappearance during the very time we believe the crime occurred." The butler cleared his throat. "It is troubling, my lord, but as I said, I know nothing." A sudden sharp noise from the corridor interrupted the moment. Wimsey and Harkness turned swiftly as the scuffling sounds grew louder, then a sharp cry. They rushed out to find Miss Elsie collapsed on the floor, pale and trembling. "Miss Elsie!" Wimsey exclaimed, kneeling beside her. "What has happened?" She gasped. I found something in the garden near the gate, a piece of fabric, a scrap of clothing. It has a strange emblem on it, a crest I do not recognize." Wimsey's eyes gleamed with renewed vigor. "Show me at once." In the grey light of the morning, the fabric was examined carefully. The emblem was an ornate M, remarkably, similar to the monogram on the secret letters. "Mr. Mallory," Wimsey said softly, "has left us a calling card, no doubt inadvertently. It seems our mystery deepens." Harkness frowned. Could this imply the solicitor was more than a visitor, perhaps an accomplice or even the perpetrator? "Possible," Wimsey agreed. "But the question remains, what was he doing here, and why so desperate to keep silence?" They returned indoors, their minds racing to piece together this fresh clue. The interplay of the missing salver, the altered clocks, the secret correspondence, and now the enigmatic visitor's emblem suggested a conspiracy more intricate than a mere crime of passion or greed. Wimsey paced thoughtfully, the cogs of his mind turning ever more swiftly. This fabric, the timing of the visitor, the scratched garden gate, it points to a calculated entry and exit, a deliberate disruption of the household's harmony. Harkness asked, "But if the solicitor was involved, why not simply confront Mr. Tarrant openly?" "Because, Inspector, fear and secrets breed in darkness. It is easier to threaten from the shadows than to face the light of reason." The detective's gaze fixed on the portraits above the fireplace. Dunwich Manor wears its history like a mask, hiding beneath the polite facade a theatre of human frailty. He turned to the inspector. "We are close, my friend. The threads are taut and the noose tightening. But the final knot remains elusive." As the day wore on, Wimsey insisted on reviewing the household's guestbook, ledgers and correspondence with a fine-toothed comb. Every detail, no matter how trivial, was weighed and measured. A subtle pattern emerged. Several payments made recently from Mr. Tarrant's account to a mysterious London firm, absent from the household's knowledge, were linked to debts that might compromise the family's standing. "The motive deepens," Wimsey murmured. "Not just silence, but preservation of reputation, an incentive potent enough to drive even the most respectable to desperation." The detective's thoughts returned repeatedly to the clockwork mechanism on the mantelpiece, a metaphor for the complex, interlocking parts of this case. It is not one piece that tells the story, he mused, but the precise alignment of all. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the great windows. Whimsy stood, his expression composed but determined. Tomorrow we must revisit the study at night, recreate the timeline of movements with the clock synchronized and the household under watch. Harkness nodded. A stakeout, then. Precisely. Only by watching the play as it unfolds can we hope to glimpse the actor hiding behind the mask. As the household prepared for the long night ahead, the manor seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the inevitable moment when the clock would strike and the truth emerge from its shadowy hiding place. The deep velvet of night settled over Dunwich Manor with a silence so profound it might have been mistaken for stillness itself. Lord Peter Wimsey, impeccably attired in his customary smoking jacket and slippers, occupied the dimly lit drawing-room, a quiet sentinel amid the shadows. Inspector Harkness sat nearby, poring over a freshly drafted chart of the adjusted timelines and household duties, the pencil in his hand tapping a steady, nervous rhythm against the arm of his chair. "Quite the theatre, this?" Wimsey murmured, eyes flickering to the tall grandfather clock, whose face betrayed its usual 5-minute advance. "Time, my dear Inspector, is a most capricious actor when misdirected by human hands." Harkness grunted in assent. The clocks, the missing salva, the cryptic letters, all seemed to be elements of a carefully composed ruse. But where does the performance truly begin? And who pulls the strings? Wimsey's lips curled into a faint, sardonic smile. Ah, the perennial question. The most cunning puppeteer is often concealed behind the finest mask. He rose and paced slowly toward the window, looking out into the blackness that swallowed the manor's grounds. It is time we attempted our own act, a midnight stakeout within the very chamber where our unfortunate Mr. Tarrant met his fate. The two men moved silently through the corridors, the heavy carpet swallowing their footsteps. The study door creaked open with a soft protest, revealing the room in muted sepia tones from a single shaded lamp. Wimsey surveyed the writing desk, the now notorious piece of furniture that concealed secrets as well as letters. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and tobacco smoke, a lingering reminder of its last occupant. "We shall take turns. Watching, Inspector," Wimsey proposed. "There is every chance our culprit might attempt to retrieve or destroy evidence in the dark hours, believing the household asleep and unaware." As the hours wore on, the grand house seemed to breathe with them, its walls whispering echoes of long-forgotten conversations, the faint creak of settling timbers, and the distant hoot of an owl. Yet nothing disturbed the solemn vigil until, just before the clock struck 2, a faint rustle came from the hallway. Wimsey, with a grace born of years in such clandestine pursuits, moved to the door. "Harkness, observe." His voice was a mere whisper as the door cracked open further, revealing a slender figure draped in a dark cloak. The intruder paused, then moved swiftly towards the study. Harkness drew his revolver, stepping quietly after Wimsey, but the figure was faster, slipping through a side door leading to the servants' quarters. The detective followed, heart quickening, to find himself in a narrow corridor lined with portraits and polished brass sconces. There, beneath a low archway, stood Granger, the butler, clutching something gleaming faintly in the half-light. "Ah, Granger," Wimsey said, voice calm, yet edged with steel. "A nocturnal prowler, or a man in desperate need of redemption?" The butler's face paled, but he did not speak. Wimsey advanced. "Might I inquire what you are doing with that silver salva, which has been missing since the unfortunate incident?" Granger's hands trembled as he revealed the object. The very salva, its surface catching the glow of the lamp. I intended to hide it, my lord," he stammered. "I feared it would implicate Miss Elsie. She is naive and frightened. I thought to protect her." "Protect her?" An interesting notion. Pray, what reason would Miss Elsie have for involvement? The butler lowered his eyes. She discovered something she should not have seen in the garden. Talked of a visitor who was not supposed to be here. I feared her being accused unjustly. Whimsy exchanged a glance with Harkness, whose expression mingled disbelief and grudging understanding. You chose to hide evidence rather than disclose it, thereby obstructing justice and deepening the shadows that surround this crime. Granger's shoulders sagged with defeat. I only wished to spare her distress. The detective motioned for the butler to accompany them back to the study. You will explain all in due course. Meanwhile, I have urgent business with Miss Elsie. They found the maid in the servants' hall, a slender figure still trembling from the shock of discovery, and her fainting spell. Whimsy approached gently, yet with a quiet authority. Miss Elsie, your bravery has been noted, but I must ask, when you discovered the fabric by the garden gate, did you recognize the emblem? She shook her head. No, my lord, it was strange. To me, though, because the embroidery was fine, far too grand for common wear. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. A fine embroidery can often mask a common purpose. Tell me, Miss Elsie, was there anyone in the household you suspected of keeping secrets, of acting differently since the murder? She hesitated, then whispered, I thought Mr. Mallory might have been here more than we knew. He often spoke, with my brother in hushed tones, but when asked, he said he came only for business. Business, yes, Whimsy mused, yet business can conceal many things, debts, threats, even blackmail. Harkness interjected, And what of the strange visit you heard near the garden gate? Did you see the visitor? No, she admitted. Only heard voices, deep and hurried, but too dark to identify. Whimsy's eyes gleamed with sudden insight. Voices, Miss Elsie, are like threads in a tapestry. When pulled carefully, they unravel the entire pattern. He turned to Harkness. We need to interview Mr. Mallory again, and this time press for details on those letters and any debts Mr. Tarrant owed. As dawn broke over the estate, the household stirred, weary and restless. Whimsy retired briefly to his quarters, but not to rest. Instead, he began reconstructing the timeline once more, layering it with the new revelations and re-examining every incongruity. His musings were interrupted by a sharp knock. The door opened to reveal Miss Beatrice Tarrant, her expression grave, but determined. Lord Peter, I must speak urgently. I found something among my brother's belongings, an additional letter hidden beneath the false bottom of a drawer. It's addressed to you. Whimsy accepted the envelope with a curious arch of his brow. The handwriting was unmistakably familiar, the precise, elegant script of Mallory. He broke the seal and read swiftly, Dear Lord Peter, if you are reading this, then I fear my efforts have failed. The debts owed by Charles Tarrant run deeper than the surface, and those who seek to silence him will go to any lengths. Trust no one blindly, and look carefully to the clocks. They will tell you more than any mouth. A.M. Whimsy folded the letter carefully. The plot thickens as we suspected. Mallory is aware of darker forces at work. Metaphorically speaking. Of course. Beatrice's eyes widened. Darker forces. Not ghosts, Miss Tarrant, but the darker recesses of human desperation. We must follow this thread, however uncomfortable. The detective looked out the window to the awakening estate. The clocks, the fabric, the letters, all pieces of a puzzle that will soon reveal its masterstroke. He turned to the inspector. Prepare for another round of interviews. This time, we will include the gardener, the housekeeper, and anyone who might have insight into Mr. Tarrant's recent activities. Harkness nodded, sensing the gravity in Whimsy's tone. As the morning progressed, a series of interviews began, each revealing subtle contradictions and small, telling details. The gardener, an elderly man with sharp eyes and a cautious tongue, mentioned a late-night visitor dressed in dark clothes who spoke hurriedly by the garden gate, Mrs. Pembroke. The housekeeper seemed reluctant, but admitted to overhearing tense conversations between the victim and Mr. Mallory, often concerning matters too delicate for servants' ears. One detail stood out, a mention of a safe, newly installed, in the study, the key to which was never found after the murder. Wimsey's thoughts spiraled to that silver salva hidden in the servants' quarters. If this object was hidden to protect Miss Elsie, might it also serve as a concealment for that missing key? His glance settled on Granger, whose guilt was now more apparent. A key, a safe, secret letters, and a visitor at a strange hour. We are close, Inspector. Very close indeed. The detective's mind raced as he planned the next steps, each more intricate than the last, aware that the culmination of this complex dance of time, secrets, and human frailty was approaching its inevitable crescendo. The manor was alive with whispered secrets and quiet watchfulness, as all awaited the moment when the clock's true face would be revealed and the final act would begin. The morning's inquiries left Wimsey with more questions than answers, yet the steady accumulation of minutiae, a faintly out-of-place clock, a hidden salva, a missing key, wove themselves into a delicate web that begged for one final unraveling. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, he found himself once again in the study, the room that had become the epicenter of so much suspicion and whispered secrets. He sat quietly, fingers steepled, as Inspector Harkness paced beside the window, restless and impatient. "You do have a plan, I presume, Wimsey. This dance with shadows cannot last forever. The family demands closure." Wimsey allowed a wry smile to touch his lips. "Closure, Inspector, is a luxury of the unobservant. Our task is to peer beneath the veneer, to tease out contradictions, however minute, and piece together the human folly that bred this crime. Let us not forget, the devil lies in the details." Harkness grunted and flicked through his notes. "Then what next? We have the gardener's testimony, the housekeeper's confessions, Granger's suspicious actions, and the mysterious letter from Mallory. It's a motley assembly. Quite so. But notice how each element converges on one focal point: the study's safe. The key to this mechanical fortress remains unaccounted for. If Mr. Tarrant sought to protect something, it would be concealed there. And if someone wished to conceal their guilt, that something would be the first to vanish. The door opened with a soft creak, and Beatrice Tarrant entered, clutching a small folded piece of paper. Her eyes held that peculiar combination of apprehension and resolve familiar to those who find themselves entwined in mysteries not of their own making. "Lord Peter," she said quietly, "I found this among my brother's effects, hidden in a pocket of his jacket." She unfolded the paper carefully and handed it to Wimsey. He scanned the contents, a hastily scribbled note, scrawled in a hand less composed than Mallory's letter. "The clock runs 5 minutes fast. Beware the hour when shadows lengthen. Trust not the silver nor the servant's guile." Wimsey's eyebrows lifted. 5 minutes fast, indeed. The clock was not merely a decorative irritant, but a deliberate instrument of deception. Someone sought to confuse time itself. Harkness rubbed his chin thoughtfully. But what does trust not the silver imply? The salva, presumably. And servant's guile. Are we to suspect Granger, or perhaps another in the household? Patience. Inspector, the language of desperation is rarely precise, but it is never without significance. Wimsey folded the note carefully. We must confront these puzzles with a reenactment. Later, with a small assembly gathered under the pretense of a simple gathering, Wimsey proposed a plan that immediately piqued curiosity and unease alike. He intended to recreate the evening of the murder precisely, tracking each moment as the clocks might have fooled the household. All must participate, Wimsey declared. for the truth requires no shadow to hide within. The household staff exchanged uneasy glances, and the Tarrant family's faces paled with a dawning apprehension. Even Inspector Harkness looked momentarily skeptical. Whimsy's instructions were meticulous. The clocks would be set as on that fateful evening. The servants would assume their exact positions and duties, and the household would move as if trapped in a temporal loop. By this means, Whimsy explained, we test the veracity of each timeline and the sincerity of each alibi. As twilight approached, the manor settled into a semblance of its prior rhythm. Whimsy observed closely the servants' movements, the placement of objects, and the timing of the chiming clock. Then, precisely as the large clock struck the hour, the study door creaked open and a figure emerged. It was Miss Elsie, moving with hesitant purpose. Whimsy's voice cut through the quiet. "Miss Elsie, if you would." She paused, startled, then nodded. "Yes, my lord." She carried the silver salva delicately, placing it on the desk. "I meant no harm," she whispered. "I only wanted to protect my lady and to keep the peace." Whimsy's gaze softened momentarily, but his tone remained firm. "Peace maintained by silence is often a brittle peace, Miss Elsie. You must understand the salva's concealment has delayed justice." At that moment, a soft chime echoed, 5 minutes before the official hour, according to the main clock. A shadow shifted near the fireplace, unnoticed by most but caught by Whimsy's keen eye. "Observe," he said softly, stepping forward. The clock was indeed 5 minutes fast, but more crucially, it caused confusion in the alibis. Those relying on the clock's time were unwittingly complicit in fabricating falsehoods. Inspector Harkness frowned. "So someone manipulated the clock to create a false timeline?" "Exactly so," Whimsy confirmed. "The murderer was counting on this temporal sleight of hand to provide a perfect alibi." He turned to Granger, who looked increasingly unsettled. "You, Granger, had every opportunity to adjust the clock, did you not? You had access and motive, fearing for Miss Elsie's welfare." The butler's composure cracked. "I did adjust it once, to mask the time of a private conversation between Mr. Tarrant and Mr. Mallory. It was not to deceive, only to protect." "Ah, but protection and deception are often indistinguishable in the shadows, are they not?" The room held its breath as Whimsy laid out the final pieces. Mr. Mallory's business was not merely financial, it was psychological warfare. He exploited debts and secrets, and when Mr. Tarrant threatened to expose him, the threat became mortal. Beatrice gasped. "But who?" "Mallory attempted to meet Mr. Tarrant under cover of darkness, using the altered clock to mislead witnesses. But the evidence, the fabric, the voices, the hidden salva, all point to someone close to the family orchestrating this." He paused, allowing the silence to deepen before continuing with quiet inevitability. "The true killer is none other than Mr. Tarrant's nephew, Charles. His resentment of his uncle's control, combined with mounting debts and the knowledge of the safe's contents, drove him to murder." Gasps erupted around the room. Charles, who had remained pale and withdrawn throughout, finally found his voice in a bitter sneer. "You have no proof." Whimsy raised a hand. "Proof is in the timing, the silenced clocks, and your uneasy presence near the garden gate. You alone lacked a solid alibi. Your excuse is always hinged on that misleading clock." Inspector Harkness stepped forward, handcuffs gleaming in the fading light. As Charles was led away, Whimsy allowed himself a moment's wry smile. "Time, Inspector, as we have seen, can be a very cunning accomplice to crime, and clocks, when manipulated, are the most persuasive liars." Beatrice approached him, eyes shining with gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you, Lord Peter. You have brought light to a darkness we feared insurmountable." Whimsy's smile was faint but genuine. "Justice, my dear Miss Tarrant, is merely the art of uncovering human folly and frailty. Now, if you will excuse me, I believe a cigar and a bit of Shakespeare are in order." With that, he turned toward the door. the household's whispered gratitude trailing behind him as the manor settled back into its usual deceptive calm, waiting for the next shadow to stir beneath its polite facade. The manor, now quiet in the wake of Charles Tarrant's departure, seemed to breathe a reluctant sigh, as if resigned to its own shadowed truths laid bare. The household buzzed softly with the low murmurs of those left behind, servants exchanging furtive glances, the family gathering in muted clusters, each trying to reassemble a semblance of normalcy out of the shattering revelations. Lord Peter. Whimsy, however, remained in the study, his thoughts lingering on the strands of deceit that had woven this particular tragedy. Inspector Harkness, ever practical, broke the silence. "So, Whimsy, we have our culprit, the motive exposed and the timeline reconstructed. One might say the case is closed." Whimsy tapped the cigar case thoughtfully, his eyes distant yet attentive. "Ah, but closure, my dear Inspector, is the repose of the hasty. We must be certain that what we see is the whole truth, not a mere convenient conclusion." Harkness frowned slightly. "Are you suggesting another player? A further layer of subterfuge?" "Not necessarily another person," Whimsy replied. "More an additional motive, psychological rather than financial. You see, human motives seldom wear a single face." He rose, pacing slowly by the tall window that overlooked the gravelled drive and the skeletal boughs of late autumn trees. "Consider Charles's resentment and debts, yes, but also the shadow cast by the deceased himself, Mr. Tarrant. A man possessed of both charm and cruelty, capable of mastering his family with subtlety. His relations with his nephew were strained, not merely by money, but by matters more delicate and unspoken. Beatrice's entrance, quiet as the autumn dusk itself, drew their attention. "Lord Peter," she began, her voice steady but tinged with fatigue, "I've been thinking." Charles's hatred was fierce, but my brother's control extended deeper, over secrets, yes, but over fears. There was something in that letter from Mallory, a hint of a greater darkness, something that even Charles feared. Whimsy nodded. "Indeed, Miss Tarrant, the letter's veiled warnings speak of a psychological game played long before the murder, a battle not merely for wealth, but for dominance, perhaps even sanity." He took from his pocket a small, folded paper, another note. This one found slipped beneath the study door only hours before the crime. Its neat script contrasted sharply with Mallory's frantic scrawl. The clock was not merely fast, but falsely trusted. "Watch the servant who claims ignorance. Their silence is a shroud." Harkness's brow creased. "A servant? You mean Granger?" Whimsy's smile was faint but sharp. "Precisely. Granger, the butler, may not be the mastermind, but he is certainly a keeper of secrets. His silence is not ignorance, but complicity." Beatrice's eyes widened. "But he claimed to be protecting Elsie, to shield her from scandal. A noble motive, if true, yet such protective inclinations often mask deeper fears. Fear of scandal, yes, but also fear of truth. We must ask ourselves what truths he wished to bury." Whimsy summoned Granger, who entered with the same stoic restraint, but whose face now betrayed a flicker of unease. "Granger," Whimsy began softly, "you have served this family loyally for many years. Yet loyalty, I find, is sometimes a chain as much as a shield." The butler's gaze did not waver. "I have done my duty, Lord Peter, nothing more. Duty often compels silence. Tell me, Granger, what did you see or hear on the night of the murder that you have not yet shared?" The man hesitated, then slowly exhaled. "I saw Charles leave the study shortly before the alarm was raised, but I also saw Miss Elsie slip away toward the garden, clutching something, a small silver item. A salva, perhaps." Whimsy interjected. "That would explain its disappearance and your reluctance to mention it." Granger nodded solemnly. "Yes, my lord. I feared its loss would implicate Elsie, whom I wished to protect." Whimsy's eyes glinted. Protection built on a mission becomes complicity, but there is more, something you have not said. After a long pause, Granger confessed, Mr. Tarrant had a secret, a past relationship with a woman in this village, a scandal never spoken of. The silver salva was a gift from her. When he found the letter from Mallory threatening to expose this, tensions rose. Beatrice gasped. A secret lover. That would explain the fear of scandal. Indeed, Whimsy murmured. And such secrets often breed desperation. He returned to the window, watching the creeping darkness. This affair was the kernel around which the entire tragedy turned. The altered clock, the stolen salva, the silent servants, they all protected a truth more fragile than gold. The inspector sighed, rubbing his temples. So, the timeline distortion was a smokescreen to conceal more than just the moment. Of death. Exactly. The clock was 5 minutes fast, but the real deception was the carefully curated silence that kept the village's gossip and the family's shame locked away. Whimsy lit his cigar, the smoke curling upward like the spiral of his thoughts. We must now confront those who profit from that silence. That evening, the great hall was once more summoned to an uneasy assembly. Whimsy, standing before the gathered household and staff, spoke with deliberate clarity. Tonight, we remove the last mask from this theatre of shadows. The murder was not merely an act of desperation, but the climax of a long psychological battle, one involving fear, loyalty, and concealed truths. He turned to Elsie, who stood pale but resolute. Miss Elsie, you carry the weight of silence, yet your role is pivotal. You knew of the secret, did you not? Tears brimmed in her eyes. Yes, my lord. I wished only to protect the family's honor, not knowing it would cost so dearly. And yet, by hiding the salva and remaining silent, you allowed suspicion to ferment and the murderer's plan to unfold. She nodded, voice trembling. I see that now. Whimsy's gaze swept the room. The true culpability lies with those who manipulated time and truth to mask their own fears. Charles Tarrant acted from resentment, yes, but he was also a pawn, moved by the shadow of his uncle's dominion and the secrets of the past. He stepped closer to Beatrice. Miss Tarrant, your brother's death is tragic, but it also frees you to reclaim your family's future, no longer shackled by secrets. The assembled listened in heavy silence as Whimsy drew the final threads together. Time, truth, and silence were the instruments of this crime. The clocks were 5 minutes fast, yes, but it was the manipulation of those 5 minutes, combined with the carefully maintained silences of the household, that allowed tragedy to unfold. He looked to Inspector Harkness. Justice, when applied, with patience and care, can untangle even the most intricate web of deception. May this be a lesson not only to us, but to all who value truth over convenience. As the household began to disperse, Whimsy lingered, his eyes distant. He pulled from his pocket a small card, upon which he had jotted a phrase from Shakespeare. Time's eldest son, oblivion. He smiled faintly, turning toward the door. Come, Inspector. There is a cigar awaiting me, and I fancy some lines from the bard to soothe the mind. Outside, the night had deepened, the manor's windows glowing faintly, like watchful eyes in the dark. The truth was out, the guilty apprehended, yet the echoes of time's deception lingered, a reminder that beneath the polished veneer of civility, human frailty and folly endure, eternal as the turning of the clocks. The study was dimly lit by the flickering flame of the fireplace, shadows playing across the polished wood and the heavy volumes that lined the walls. Lord Peter Whimsy stood by the mantelpiece, cigar in hand, his expression one of serene detachment. Around him, the key. Figures of the household gathered, Inspector Harkness, Miss Beatrice Tarrant, the subdued Elsie, and the now weary Granger. All awaited the denouement, though none quite knew how intricately their fates would be revealed. Whimsy began with a languid gesture toward the grandfather clock, the very object that had been the linchpin of confusion. The clock that was 5 minutes fast. What a splendid metaphor for the entire case. Time, as you all discovered, is a notoriously unreliable witness when left unchecked. He turned, fixing each listener with an intent, penetrating gaze. The clock, carefully altered to mislead, served to fabricate an alibi as fragile as the silver salva concealed by Granger. Yet, what is most instructive is not these physical contrivances, but the human psychology they mask. Charles Tarrant, Whimsy continued, was a man torn by resentment, yes, but also by a desperate need to claim control over a legacy that had long been wielded by his uncle, Edward. Yet it was not the mere money, nor the distant threat of scandal, that drove him to murder. Beatrice swallowed, her composure strained. Then what was it, Lord Peter? Power, my dear Miss Tarrant. Power over narrative, over truth itself. Your uncle's secret liaison with the village woman, his manipulation of family loyalties, and his cruel game of psychological domination created a pressure cooker of fear and shame. Whimsy's eyes glinted. Charles saw himself as the liberator, but in doing so, he became trapped in his own web of deceit. The altered clock was meant to divert suspicion, the salva hidden to protect reputation, and the servant's silences to preserve appearances. He turned to Granger, who stood rigid. Your silence, Granger, was not simple loyalty. It was fear of the consequences should the truth come to light. You, too, were a prisoner of this psychological tyranny. The butler bowed his head, his voice low. I only wished to protect those who could not protect themselves. A noble sentiment, but one that entangled you in the very tragedy you sought to prevent. Whimsy's glance shifted to Elsie. And you, Miss Elsie, have borne much in silence. But silence is a treacherous ally. The truth, though painful, is the only path to freedom. Elsie's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded. Finally, Whimsy addressed Inspector Harkness. The physical evidence, when viewed alongside the psychological undercurrents, reveals a crime born of human frailty, not mere circumstance. Charles's fatal error was to underestimate how thoroughly his uncle had manipulated those around him, and how deeply the shadows of the past could reach into the present. He paused, tapping the cigar case. Justice, then, is not simply the unveiling of a perpetrator, but the illumination of the tangled motives that led to tragedy. As the household absorbed the truth, Whimsy raised his glass in a quiet salute. Let us remember, as the bard so wisely wrote, that the web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together. With that, he turned toward the door, a faint smile touching his lips. Now, Inspector, shall we find that cigar and see if the bard has any further wisdom for the night? Outside, the wind stirred the fading leaves, carrying with it the last echoes of secrets laid bare. The clocks might have been fast, but at last, time was on the side of truth.